Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guests, Dr. Alex-Lickerman and Dr. Ash-eldifrawi. And they're here today to share with us their new book, The 10 Worlds, The New Psychology of Happiness. Now, Dr. Alex is a primary care physician, former assistant professor of medicine, former director of primary care, and former assistant vice president for student health and counseling services at the University of Chicago. Dr. Alex currently leads a primary care practice in Chicago called ImagineMD. Dr. Ash has built a reputation as a thought leader in clinical, social, and commercial psychology. Dr. Ash received his bachelor's degree in biology and a master's degree in social sciences from the University of Chicago, where he also conducted clinical research in the areas of neurology and biopsychology. He earned his doctorate in clinical psychology from the Chicago School of Psychology, completed his internship at the world-renowned Family Institute at Northwestern, and went on to be the inaugural fellow at the equally renowned Center for Family Health at the University of Chicago. They're here today to share with us their new book, The 10 Worlds, The New Psychology for Happiness. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Ash and Dr. Alex.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I have to ask, this book is just absolutely profound. It's life-changing. What inspired the both of you to write this book?
Well, I have to confess, it was originally Ash's idea. About 20 years ago, when I was after I had finished medical school and my residency, and Ash was beginning his work as a clinical psychologist, we were talking about this Buddhist organization, this Buddhist philosophy of the 10 worlds, which is the source material from where our work comes from, as a way of explaining how the human mind works. And Ash got very interested in the idea of a paradigm that explains why people are not as happy as they could be. And so we were very interested in sort of answering that age-old question: what is it that enables people to become happy, long-term happy, when there are so many terrible things that are destined to happen to us all? And that was the genesis of it.
Well, it's fascinating that you use very ancient belief system to go ahead and look at the question of happiness and what inspires happiness, because right now we're in this epidemic where people are just miserable.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting, isn't it? Because even though there's all this research that's being done right now on happiness and the explosion of the positive psychology movement and our ability to understand things more profoundly, yet despite all of that, recent studies suggest that the world is actually an unhappier place than it's ever been, and which ultimately in the last few years really ignited us to try to get this book out there. Because as Alex mentioned, we've been working through this thing for a couple of decades, even as some of the science caught up with some of our thoughts about this. So I think you're right. I think it's very timely, and we hope that this book offers a way to think differently than people have in the past about how to attain happiness that lasts in the face of a world that seems to be getting harder and harder to maintain enduring happiness.
But I'd add that one of the reasons we turn to the ancient Buddhist philosophy is because Buddhism itself was grew out of a desire to answer this same question, as long as 2,500 years ago that people have been asking themselves as long as humanity has existed. And our interest was, over 2,500 years of Buddhist thinking around this topic and observing the way human beings attack this problem. There had to be some value in that, and we wanted to know, has there been some recent science that kind of supports their model, the model of the 10 worlds, and then what does it mean for modern day people who are struggling to be happy in the same way the ancients were? And it turned out quite a bit.
Well, I'm glad that the both of you have approached the book in actually the pursuit of happiness in the way that you have. And I'd love for you to share with us what you believe is some of the reasons why, just happiness is eluding people.
Yeah, so I think that, and this is actually gets into the crux of the book. I think part of there's a few different reasons for it. I think one of the main reasons is that people mistake happiness, that what we call relative happiness or happiness that's temporary, as a way of attaining happiness that they think will last. So all the different things that we do to pursue happiness ultimately aren't necessarily enduring or can withstand, when bad things happen to us. So, for example, in the book, we talk about different ways in which people go after happiness, or different beliefs they have about what happiness is. And then we explain why over time that might not necessarily be enduring. So, for example, one of the examples we give, which is in the world of hunger, which is people believe that happiness comes from getting what they want, right? Which sounds very logical, right? If I get what I want, if I get the job, or if I make the money, or if I get the spouse, or if I even get the car, if I can just get that, I can be happy. But as we know, once we attain those things, while they might get a hit of happiness, it ultimately doesn't always last, and you're on to the next thing. Or if, let's say, you get what you want and then you lose it. You get a job, but then you lose the job. So the very thing that you think could have been the source of your happiness ultimately becomes the source of your greatest misery. And so you're on this, you're on this wheel, or this constant search. And there's never really a point of happiness that truly endures. So one of the reasons for that is because people think that the things that make them temporarily happy are going to last, and then they're surprised when it doesn't.
And in fact, I'd take a step back and answer that question even more basically, which is that the reason people struggle to be happy is because they are deluded about what happiness is and what they need to become happy. In fact, this is the core thesis of the book, which is that how happy or unhappy we are really is determined mostly by what we believe happiness to be and what we think we need to be happy. And so what Ash is getting into there is this division between what we define as relative happiness and absolute happiness. Most people believe that happiness is only attainable when you have something that makes you happy. An attachment, in other words. And that attachment could be anything. It could be a person, it could be money, it could be a job, it could be your health, it could be anything that you feel you possess, and that when you think about it, it brings you joy. And as Ash pointed out, the problem with that is that any attachment we have that brings us happiness, we can lose. And in fact, ultimately, we're destined to lose every attachment that we have, including the attachment we have to our own lives. And so people, yet they think that's all that there is to hope for. And we're arguing in the book, in the 10th chapter, that there's a different type of happiness that we call absolute happiness, because it is not dependent on attachment. It's not dependent on having anything. It's dependent upon viewing the world in a certain way, having a certain perception of the world based on a core belief that we call a core truth, and really enveloping that truth and allowing that truth, that belief, to be stirred up in you in a way that generates a state of joy that cannot be taken away from you or destroyed by any loss.
And what a powerful place to come from when you're in a place where, your house burns down, there's a flood, something happens, and all of your possessions are gone, but you can still have that inner peace.
Yeah, and I don't want to, it's not easy. It's not you can just snap your fingers and sort of be in that place. But we're arguing that there is science to suggest there is a way to establish such a life state in yourself that even when you lose everything precious to you, you can still be in that place and not be destroyed by it. Doesn't mean you won't feel the pain of that loss, but it does mean you won't be suffering and defeated by it.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up pain and suffering, because in your book, you talk about that there's a difference between that. Why is it important for us to understand this?
Alex, why don't you take that one?
I'll take that one. Right. So it's important to understand this because, in fact, what we really think is important to avoid is suffering, and in fact, not pain. Pain and suffering are really quite different. And the way we and the psychological and even neurological literature is beginning to define pain and suffering as two entirely distinct entities that actually arise from different parts of the brain itself. So pain we consider to be defined as any unpleasant feeling, meaning that could be a physical feeling like the physical pain we all are very familiar with, or it could be emotional pain. But if you think about it, pain itself is very functional. It's not a bad thing. We are programmed to want to avoid it because it's a way of us keeping our life and limb intact. But it also serves us very well. And there are many examples you can imagine where pain equals gain. The most obvious one being where that phrase comes from, which is people who are trying to exercise and become healthier, fitter, or stronger. That type of pain is not a bad pain. In fact, weightlifters or bodybuilders are going for the burn. They're actually trying to create that pain because they can tolerate it. And the reason they can tolerate it, among other things, is because what that pain means is something different when you have, for example, the pain of injury. Suffering, on the other hand, we define as the experience of being overwhelmed by pain. So, for example, you can experience a headache and be bothered by it and not appreciate it, and rather you didn't have it, but not be unable to function because of it, a minor headache. But then you can experience a migraine that can put you on your back and make you utterly unfunctional and make you feel like you can't bear another minute of it. So in the first instance, you're feeling the pain of the migraine, but you're not suffering because of it, because you're not being overwhelmed or defeated by it. It's a very particular experience, suffering versus pain, and it is the experience of being overwhelmed by pain that we are trying to avoid. That really is sort of our response to pain, our emotional response to pain. And as I said before, they occur in different parts of the brain, and people will do all sorts of damage to themselves and actually often create far more suffering in the act of trying to avoid legitimate pain. For example, in another world we describe, the world of animality, which is based on the core delusion of the belief that pleasure and pain are the same thing. Pleasure and happiness are the same thing. And so these are people, for example, who may spend their lives in pursuit of physical bodily pleasures like, alcohol and drug abuse. And a lot of times people are trying to numb pain that they feel with these substances. And in doing so, thinking that they're sparing themselves pain. But ultimately what that ends up doing for many of them is it creates lives that are filled with suffering, lives that are literally falling apart as a result of their substance abuse, which they are seeking, which they are doing to avoid feeling pain.
Well, thank you for taking the time to explain that, because that makes a lot of sense when you view it that way. And so I'd like to ask also, how does anxiety play a part in all this? Because we also seem to have a society that is very anxious nowadays.
Well, anxiety, I think obviously, by the way, suffering and anxiety are very linked, as is depression and anxiety. And part of the psychological component of suffering, when you start thinking about, besides physical suffering, when you start talking about psychological suffering, that starts getting into a place where you feel like you're suffering from something and you can't solve it, or you can't get out of it, or you don't see a way out. And that is one of the ways in which anxiety sort of enters the picture. It's when you feel like you can't bring an end to your suffering, or you don't see a solution, which then leads to a lot of anxiety around that, the inability to stop it. So anxiety is sometimes tends to be a response to suffering, a response to pain that you don't think you can end. And so they're very, very linked. And I think society's experience, the anxiety people feel tends to be drawn from the fact that they actually don't know or see a solution to their problem, which causes them to be very anxious all the time.
The other way to think about this, though, is that anxiety itself is a form of pain. And as a form of pain, it can either be pain you can tolerate or pain that makes you suffer. So, for example, we think about anxiety as always being universally bad. That's really not the case. Mild anxiety is extremely motivating. And in fact, a lot of people without mild anxiety would never study for a test or wouldn't strive to, solve problems that matter. And so a little bit of anxiety is actually a very positive thing. It may be unpleasant, meaning it may be a form of emotional pain, but not necessarily a form of emotional pain that makes you suffer. But I think what you're referring to, Marianne, is when anxiety becomes so overwhelming, it's so large and so out of proportion that it paralyzes us and it freezes us, and we spend all of our emotional time and energy just managing the feeling itself. Then it becomes a pain that makes us suffer. And that's the type of anxiety that we really want to avoid, and that I think is becoming more and more epidemic in our society. And for various reasons, the causes of that anxiety are often what Ash is describing. And fundamentally get down to, if we have a problem we feel we must solve, but cannot solve, and in being unable to solve it, we feel in some way unsafe. That is a great producer of anxiety that is often overwhelming. And the issue there is, what is the nature of that problem? How true is it that we can't solve it? Is there some way to solve it we haven't thought of? And that goes, into sort of the solution about how to approach anxiety. But fundamentally, it comes down to a belief that you have a problem you must solve that you cannot solve, and in the act of being unable to solve it, you are in some way in danger.
Well, it's very interesting when you shift the perspective and look at it from a problem-solving aspect. It really shifts the energy and how people would probably feel about that particular event that's causing the anxiety, so then they can start moving forward.
It's exactly the way you actually approach it. When I was dealing with clients or patients who were dealing with anxiety, it was really about a mindset shift. Right? I mean, that's a lot of anxiety is obviously response to your own feelings and thoughts and negative and destructive thoughts that are then cause even physical anxiety, and then it creates kind of a loop. A lot of anxiety actually comes from people responding to their own physical reactions they're having to that fear or to the panic or to the thoughts, these negative thoughts that they can't get out of their head. And so we spent a lot of time, for a lot of people, that the process of trying to help them with anxiety is really about how to shift your mindset, battle those thoughts, compartmentalize those thoughts so that you can see things slightly differently, so that you can see there are outcomes. Understanding, the concept of what you can and cannot control. And a lot of times anxiety is, we used to call, you're paying a tax on a debt you're never even going to incur. And so a lot of it was exactly about kind of thinking about how to think about things differently and frame them differently in people's minds as a part of a treatment for anxiety.
Which is actually, if you think about it, sort of, again, the core message of our book, which is that, anxiety arises from, or all feelings, in fact, arise from the way we interpret our experiences, which are based on our beliefs. And so when Ash talks about reframing those ideas and the way you think about it, it's really a matter of becoming more mindful of what it is you believe that is, about what's happening in your life or might be happening in your life, or your risk for happening in your life, that is triggering your anxiety. And so it can often be approached by examining and even changing the beliefs that are being stirred up for you in your own life.
Yeah, in fact, interestingly, you had asked earlier on, like, what motivated the book. One of the things that motivated me is this. It really gets to the simple idea that, like, why does the same exact event happen to two people? However, each person could respond to it in a fundamentally different way. One person, it could lead to all kinds of anxiety, breaking up, ending a relationship, or losing a job. For some people, which are two things that create a lot of anxiety and fear and depression for people. But others, one person might be devastate them and send them spiraling. Another person actually could see it as something that's freeing, or an opportunity to learn or grow or change. Or again, what is the difference? The event is the same. But it's the mindset, what is it stirring up in them, or what beliefs they have that they're responding to are fundamentally different.
I think that's pretty profound, especially a lot of times people don't even realize that they're in that perspective, and there are they can make the shift themselves and really change that perspective and look at things a different way.
Well, that's exactly it, right? That often the beliefs that have us in their grip, that lead to our responses to our life events and things that are going on and cause all types of emotional distress, we're completely unconscious of them or unaware that that's what's really going on. And so part of why we wrote the book was to sort of draw attention for people to the 10 core beliefs that we are all subject to and operating to, that sort of all of the beliefs we have about everything in our lives, about what makes us happy and unhappy, all sort of filter down into one of these 10. And if you can pause and become aware of how those beliefs are functioning in your life, it's the first step to gaining control over them and changing your response to the things that are going on in your life from a negative response to a positive response.
I know you talk about in your book that we all exist in one of the 10 worlds at any given moment, and you even have this great self-assessment quiz on the website, the 10worlds.com. Why is it important for us to know this?
So I think Alex started getting into it in terms of because these are so powerful and determine your overall life condition. The fact that they're operating subconsciously could make you feel like you have no control over it, or you can't change it, or or it doesn't give you any access to figuring out how to potentially change your circumstances or battle some of these all these negative emotions we've talked about today. And so we do believe that when you have ability to understand them, ability to actually bring them in your consciousness and examine them, is the first kind of key step to figuring out how to potentially gain more control over them and have them gain control over you. So I'll give you an example from my own life. So I come from the world of tranquility, which is governed by the belief that happiness comes from avoiding pain. And we're primarily talking about emotional pain. And so kind of said a different way, at least for me, the way that operated in my life was that for me, happiness came from sort of seeking peace of mind or finding security. And so that was governing, of course, trying to seek that all the time by avoiding certain negative outcomes, or trying to control the uncontrollable, or being paralyzed when faced with really big decisions, because I felt that if I make the wrong decision, that will lead to pain, and I can't afford to make the wrong decision. And as you can imagine, Marianne, you're talking about anxiety. That world is sort of filled with that. If you're not aware that's operating and that you're chasing something that is ultimately not going to lead to your happiness. So for me, when I was actually able to understand, because when I wrote the book, I did not think that's the world I came from. When I discovered that about myself, now when I face certain decisions in my life, I understand that this belief that if I make the wrong decision, I can't be happy is actually a delusion. It's not real, or that happiness truly comes from peace of mind. I realize that peace of mind it's impossible to control the uncontrollable. So I'm seeking something that's causing me more anxiety than anything else, rather than happiness. So suddenly having that in my consciousness has helped me in those moments really change my mindset around that, which has really helped me not face these decisions with a lot of anxiety. And it's freed me in a lot of ways, which I don't think would have happened if I didn't at least come to understand that what's guiding it is this delusional belief that to be happy, I have to avoid pain.
And what Ash has just done is actually described many of the characteristics of people who are living in this world of tranquility. And so to answer your question, even more specifically, is that why does it matter to know which world you're in? Because when you recognize, oh yeah, I'm in the world of animality right now, I'm completely obsessed with, drinking alcohol or eating or whatever physical pleasure it may be, it actually tells you a lot about yourself. It predicts your behavior. It predicts how you will feel about things. It actually explains yourself. Explains you to yourself and enables you to recognize, oh, that must mean I'm in the grip of this particular belief that I'm only going to be happy if I can experience pleasure, or I'm only going to be happy, as in Ash's case, if I can find peace of mind. Because often when you're stuck in these worlds, you're actually not as happy as you could be, because you're pursuing the wrong thing. Ash is basically saying, by pursuing peace of mind, it's forcing him or bringing him to decisions and to make decisions, or the inability to make decisions, that is causing a lot of problems in his life. And so having the perspective that, oh yeah, I'm behaving this way and feeling this way because I am stuck in the world of tranquility, becomes really practically useful, because it gives you that perspective. And in attaining that perspective, it gives you power over that belief rather than allowing that belief to have power over you.
Wow, what a powerful place to come from. It's all of that. And then you look at the 10th world, the world of enlightenment. Is that something that the both of you have been able to obtain and to hold on to for a period of time?
Briefly, a little bit. We actually write in the book. Ash and I both independently had experiences of what the 10th world, the world of enlightenment, is like. And that chapter really is about the idea that enlightenment is not something that only a few Buddhist monks who are meditating in caves and sort of appealing to some mystic principle or law can attain, but actually it is something that anyone has the potential to achieve, because it is a very real brain state, and there are very real neurologic changes we're beginning to identify, and causes of this state we're beginning to identify, that if you begin to pursue them, the likelihood that you'll experience that state more often than not becomes a reality. And it doesn't require a religious belief. It doesn't require anything like that, but it requires sort of understanding what is the neurology and psychology behind that state, and how can we take advantage of it in a way that we can all become our most joyous, wisest, happiest selves.
I love that science has caught up with, when we look at kind of Eastern philosophy in many ways, and how this is all coming together.
It's catching up, right? I mean, we're really at the dawn of understanding this. There aren't even people necessarily in science who are necessarily thinking about pursuing an understanding of this, but a lot of the work that's being done around meditation and, interestingly, psychedelic drugs like LSD and psilocybin are beginning to point the way to linking what people's experiences with those things are now to what has always been described, again, all the way back to the dawn of humanity and writing. In every society, in every time, there are people describing what this life state of enlightenment is like. And though they may use different terminology and may ascribe different causes based on their belief structure at the time, religious or otherwise, the core characteristics of what it's like to be in that state are remarkably similar from society to society and epoch to epoch. And so only now is science beginning to sort of explain the reason for that is because this is literally a brain state, and that the brain state seems to be identifiable and identical in all these circumstances. And so it's something that we can all one day hope there'll be a really clear path to achieve it.
What are some of the characteristics of enlightenment?
So one of the characteristics, they're very similar. So the first one is there is this sense of the diminishment of the sense of self, and simultaneously this sense of connection to everything around us. And the danger, of course, in describing this, it starts to sound very mystical and very otherworldly. And I don't mean it that way, because people who have experienced this even briefly will know what I'm talking about. You just feel this incredible connection to your environment and to other people. Similarly, you feel this incredible sense of love and goodwill to them, this overwhelming feeling of compassion for all beings that is also brings forth this transcendent joy, this sense of the joy of all joys is how it is described. And it is not a joy that's like one feels, say, when under the influence of a narcotic that just sort of, wipes you out and you just want to lie there and sort of experience it. But it makes you feel like your most wisest, happiest, purest, healthiest self. There is this great diminishment of the fear of death, this sense that in some way you are coextensive with all of existence in some way, and that the fear of your life, your one little life extinguishing, seems to just fall away. And at the same time, there's something called the noetic sense, this ineffable sense of that putting what this state really is into words is really difficult. And that's why often when people talk about it like I am now, you sound sometimes a little bit silly, because it's so outside of the norm experience that we experience in our everyday lives. And yet it really is just right there for us to experience.
Well, it's interesting when we look at people like the Dalai Lama, who, and there are many other people like him who reach this level of enlightenment, and they kind of just really show the world that this is something that can be obtained. It really gives us hope that that's something all of us can have, even if it's in little bits and pieces.
Well, we hope so. And honestly, one of the main reasons I wanted to write this book is I wanted to explore this idea in the last chapter and actually try to inspire people to imagine it's something they could attain for themselves. Because so much of what's wrong with the world today, frankly, is because people are pursuing happiness for themselves in ways that are really destructive, and not just destructive to themselves, but destructive to people around them. And imagine what the world would be like if people were not even just all have attained enlightenment, but were seeking enlightenment and recognizing that this life state exists where they don't need, say, power over other people, or they don't need to hurt other people or control other people in any way in order for themselves to be happy. How we might all relate to one another in a different way if we really had that kind of happiness available to ourselves. And so we're hoping that people come away, having read the book, with the inspiration to pursue that 10th world and to actually find it within themselves, because it takes work. You have to first aspire to achieve it, and then you actually have to pursue a path that really has the possibility of enabling you to achieve it. And we point that the way to those things in the 10th chapter, and really hope ultimately to be inspirational that way.
Yes, I found that the 10 worlds is really a roadmap for people to be able to get there, because you have to know where you're at and know where you're going. You have to have that roadmap.
Yeah, you're right. I think one of the reasons that Alex and I wrote this is, again, and I think Alex, and we stress that this is not, this is our framework that we're putting out there, that we hope sparks debate, that we hope ignites maybe some real research or empirical work around it. But more than anything, we did want to inspire people to think differently about their journey towards being happy, and motivate people to think about it a little bit differently. And examine their lives in a way that ultimately, not even necessarily everybody having to achieve the sense of enlightenment, but even by understanding what beliefs might have you in their grip, how they're really delusional, will ultimately, on a day-to-day basis and over the course of your lifetime, allow you to achieve a happiness that's a lot more enduring, that lasts, and that's less destructive to you and to the world.
Well, your book, The 10 Worlds, I feel is a great book. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community? And of course, take the self-assessment test.
So as you mentioned earlier, we have a website, the10worlds, all one word, .com, where they can connect with us, certainly reach out to us. We love to hear from readers, as well as take the assessment you're mentioning, the quiz, that very briefly will give people a rough idea of what world may be sort of their basic life tendency. And then if they want to explore that a little more and confirm that, they can actually buy the book wherever books are sold, certainly at Barnes & Noble and on Amazon.
Well, Dr. Ash and Dr. Alex, thank you both so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
We appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. I appreciate it.
Well, it's been an honor to spend this time with you and talk about your new book, The 10 Worlds, The New Psychology of Happiness. The 10 Worlds available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers, and makes the perfect gift for the holidays. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.